Hi, and welcome back again to Research Methodologies. This mini lecture is about ethics in research design. Now, I know that all of you have followed a course in ethics and know a little bit more about ethics and what we should and shouldn't be doing when we're doing our work as engineers or as researchers. However, when it comes to research, and especially scientific research that you may want to publish, it's important to realize that just having an ethical knowledge and a basic consideration of ethics isn't enough. There are certain rules that we as researchers, and I count you all as part of my researchers for this purpose, must take into account. So this class will focus very much on those rules and what we expect from you and what are good ethical research habits to get into. It's probably very clear to most of you that when you do research, for instance, a medical research or research involving animals, that you need all sorts of permission. Thankfully, you are not allowed to start prodding needles into people without their permission, and also in order to test on animals or be allowed to even kill animals for the purpose of testing, you have to meet very stringent conditions. But you may argue, at aerospace engineering, we rarely do that. It's unlikely that we'll send a dog into space because that's been done. That may be the case, but most of us, for at least some of the research we do, work with people or we work with data that other people may also use. And those are considerations we also need to take into account. We need to make sure that everything has been done ethically, above board, and is transparent and open. So, if you look at that, let's start off with the ethical considerations for research when we're looking about how you carry out the research. If you work with people or people's equipment, it's important that whoever gives you the equipment or whoever participates in your research gives informed consent. So just saying, can I do some research on you, isn't what's called informed consent. You're supposed to tell them why you're doing the research, what type of research they'll be exposed to. It could be something as simple as a questionnaire, and that they have a right to say no, a right to not participate. That is what's called informed consent. They must be able to say yes or no. Informed consent can be very simple. Every time you fill in a questionnaire, if you read the first 3-4 lines, that actually is where you give where they inform you what the objective is of the research and why you're asked to fill this out. So it's not a very hard thing to do, most of the cases, but it's important that you do it. Participants should be aware of what the experiments involve and their rights, including the right to say no. Now this may be annoying if you need lots of people to get your research to be valid enough. But at the same time, your research is basically completely invalid and unpublishable if you didn't get informed consent. The second thing you should do is when you do tests is, unless it is detrimental for the outcome of what you should avoid deceiving participants. So telling participants that, for instance, and this might be a bit too far out there, but you're doing a research for EasyJet when in fact you're doing it for KLM, that is called deception. And unless it serves a purpose, which it rarely does, and when I mean a purpose in terms of research, not a purpose in order to get a larger participation response, that is not a valid purpose. You should not have deception. If you do need to employ active deception, for instance, trying to create a certain emotion in people, which may be happening in certain human factors research, then you need to be extremely careful that you get permission from your supervisors and possibly also, or actually most likely the ethics board, to do this. Because you are messing with people's minds and you never know what can happen. It's very important that then you follow the guidelines which go for your specific branch of science and the specific investigations and research that you're doing. Then it's very important to close the loop with your participants. That is debrief, in which case you tell the participant what the experiment was about. You tell them thank you, and if possible, you offer to inform them of the results. A simple example is you sometimes see this at the questionnaire. Would you like to hear what the results are? Tick a box, etc. If you want to say thank you, you can either send them a letter, or you can say, oh well, if you want to get a response up, you could say, well, I am raffling off X cinema tickets, all those sorts of things, but make sure that you close the loop. The fourth item you have to look at is confidentiality. People volunteer or get paid a small stipend to help you with your research. But especially if you're doing in-company research, where you may find stuff that is critical of the company's current ways of working, it is very important that you maintain confidentiality as a researcher. It's very important that somebody who takes part has the confidence that what they say cannot be traced back to them. So you may say, oh well, I just won't name names. No, but you must be very careful that, for instance, when you literally quote them, word by word, that you make very sure that it's not a very recognizable thing. There's nothing worse than basically betraying the loyalty and the confidentiality of the people. The same if you have a questionnaire and only 5 people fill it in, and people have a rough idea who those 5 people were, that people can say, oh well, 20% said this, oh that must have been John or Paul or etc. In that case, you should be really careful on how you present the results, or simply say, I'm very sorry, I did not have sufficient measurements to actually present my results. So it's very important that the anonymity and traceability to a single person from the publication of your results is not possible. And finally, although this may speak for itself, you should really protect people from physical and psychological harm. Now, physical harm is probably very obvious, but psychological harm is especially important to keep in mind when you start playing mind games. Although you naturally assume that everybody is completely stable, if you start messing with their mind and there's other stuff going on, you never know what may happen. So make sure you follow these basic guidelines. Now, for most of you, this is a laugh because I'm going to program something in a computer. That's great. For you guys, the next section might be a bit more relevant, but if you're doing anything that involves working with people or people's equipment, make sure you get this right. And why do you need to get it right? Well, the world of science wasn't always very good at this. You've probably all heard of experiments in the US in the 50s and the 60s where things weren't going exactly how they were really supposed to go, and some people did actually get physically or psychologically harmed. So as a result, over the whole world, ethics boards got set up. In fact, most of the scientists got together and came to an agreement in something called the Helsinki Declaration. And that actually talks about research with the human factor involved. What you need to do. There is a standard questionnaire with questions that you have to ask yourself before you do your research. And if you answer one of these questions with a yes, then you may need to get permission. So most universities, especially the liberal arts universities, already have an ethics board, and so does TU Delft. But that's for universities. But if you work for a company or a different research institute, most of them also have ethics boards that actually look objectively at your research. So when you encounter something that involves human research, make sure that you actually look if you need permission, and if so, whom. You can usually not apply for that permission alone. Your supervisor will also have to co-sign. So how does that work within TU Delft? The TU Delft has an ethics board for human research. It's called the Human Research Ethics Commission, HREC. You need their permission for research that involves human test subjects. This includes, amongst others, participants in questionnaires, interviews, and testers. In order to make life simple, because it's not set out to make you delay, etc., on their website, there are forms that with a questionnaire that you fill in. Those are the questions from the Helsinki Declaration, and it says what you have to do in which case. Even if you answer all their questions no, you still have to apply for. Then you still have to submit a form for permission. Why? 9 out of 10 times, if you want to publish your data, Or if your supervisor at a later stage wants to use your work in a publication, we can only publish it if you've gotten permission from your ethics board. But you have to get that permission in advance. Retrospectively, permission can never be given. So make sure you get this sorted out straight away. Generally speaking, if you have simple research and you have answered all the questions with no, then really you get your permission within a week. All you have to do is submit your research objectives, your main research questions, and a small outline of how you're going to carry out your research. This is why making sure you have a good project plan is really good, because you can cut, copy, paste parts of that into this form and then submit it. More information and the current standard, because what I'm saying today might even change tomorrow, because even the world of ethics is in constant movement on what we should and shouldn't do, and on how to apply for permission, can be found at the moment at the HREC webpage, so hrec.tudelft.nl. If the webpage moves for whatever reason, look for the Human Research Ethics Commission on the TU Delft website. Please also note that this committee is set up with different members of staff from each faculty. So aerospace has a representative, and so does every other faculty. So if you're unsure on how to proceed, find out who the current representative is for aerospace and send them an email and ask them a question or two if you're unsure. But most of the time, you just go to the website and everything should be fairly straightforward. It is really not a lot of work, but it does make your work publishable, and you're in line with the ethical rules and regulations at this university. So I didn't do human research ethics, so this was all a waste of time. Well, not entirely, because at some point in your life you're going to get this sort of research on your desk, and you're going to have to see if the people who give you that research follow the rules before you sign off at it as a responsible manager. But what about research data ethics? Over the years, there have been many fairly well publicized incidents of research data being faked. From somebody who alleged that they had successfully cloned a number of similar animals in Korea when they didn't, to somebody who completely arranged fake measurement data that were perfectly normal, distributed, and were so good that all the research was really worthwhile. This was the case at Tilburg University. That was very recently highlighted. The problem with it it generally tends to happen that people don't keep good track of their data and don't ask critical questions. We are here at master level, so we expect you to ask critical questions. And also, we expect you to treat your data ethically. So, what is that then? First of all, whatever you do, if you measure or generate computer data, etc., keep your raw data. That is the data that you haven't altered one iota. This data you must keep for at least 10 years. This is why you'll find that every chair is slowly starting to have a data retention policy. Not only do you have to put your thesis in the repository, you also have to hand over your source code and some of the data files. And if you do measurements, you most definitely have to do this. However, I would also recommend that unless there's a confidentiality agreement barring you from this, that you keep your own personal copy of all that data, so that if you're ever questioned or asked about it, you also have your copy. That way, you can always prove where you went there. Then the next thing is when you start playing with your data, make sure that your data alterations, sometimes you need to alter data or modify the data to make them go into the next analysis program. Think, for instance, questionnaires where you start adding categories together and other things, all these tricks that, again, the word tricks, we shouldn't really use it, but all these measures that you take to see if you can find the right relationships and whether things actually work, that you have a logbook in which you log what you've done with it. This also means that your computer data management must be above board. meaning you have a logbook which says where which file is changed, what you changed to each file, and you save each file under a different name. This might sound stupid, but once you've messed up your raw data file and that basically becomes your modified data file, you never have a raw data file again. And if you change data multiple times, you never make sure that with every change that it can be traced back to the original, that there is a previous copy. So make sure you have a good logging system or a good multiple files, etc., but make sure it can be traceable and that everything can be traced back eventually to the original data. This also ensures that your work is reproducible, and with that I mean that if I give your work to somebody else to say, verify this, you create a model based on this thesis, this is what he put in, and this is what should have come out, that she comes up with the same data. The next thing you need to do is really be very careful when you are given data. You never know where it comes from. Verify that the measurements took place in the way they took place. Verify that the people, if it's human research involving human subjects, that the people gave you permission. Verify that the research was actually carried out and not created by an Excel random number generator. Now, some of you may laugh at this point, but this is really what happened. And I think about 20 PhDs, master students, and assistant professors had invalid publications, invalid theses, because they were all based on faked data. And basically, for those who pursued a career in research, their careers are over. Their name is forever tarnished and stained. So do not accept someone's word for it, even if that person is the Queen of Sheba. Do not care, stick to the facts, ask the questions. If you're unsure if what's right and wrong in terms of data, check with the university's code of ethics. There are plenty of guidelines in there what you can and can't do. There are also people at the library who can help you with data retention and how to do it ethically. But by all means, please be safe rather than be sorry. So that's it for now. I hope you understand why ethics are important, and see you again next time. Bye bye.